Under the high arches of the alien royal court, silence pressed against the walls like a heavy fog. The room was vast, carved from black stone that shimmered with veins of silver, each surface catching the glow of hanging crystal lights. 100. Alien eyes turned at once when the doors opened, and a single figure was led inside. She was small, slight, and human. A girl who looked even smaller when framed by the sheer size of the hall and the towering beings who filled it. The guards, who brought her, stopped just a few paces inside the room, their sharp armor clinking as they stepped back. She stood alone now, unarmed, with no companions to shield her. Her boots sank slightly into the polished floor, and her hands hung quietly at her sides. She did not bow, though every custom of the court demanded it. She did not tremble, though. The weight of dozens of alien gazes pressed down on her like a storm. From the throne at the far end, the ruler watched her. The throne itself seemed too large for any creature to sit in, carved from a block of dark crystal, with spires that reached upward like claws. Around the ruler, nobles and commanders whispered in low tones, their words carrying the same sharp edge as their stares. To them, the girl was nothing more than a fragile animal brought into their hall for amusement. She was out of place, too soft, too human. Some laughed quietly, mocking her size. Others shook their heads, already certain that she would collapse the moment her courage was tested. A few leaned forward with cruel smiles, eager for her to fail. The court had seen warriors, prisoners, and envoys from across the galaxy enter these halls, but never had they seen a human girl brought before them in such a state, small, defenseless, and without allies. Her heart beat fast, but her face did not reveal it. She felt the weight of their disdain, the sting of their laughter, but she did not lower her head. Instead, she lifted her chin just slightly, as if to say that she knew where she was, and she would not let them break her with silence. Her eyes, though young, held a quiet determination, the kind that often goes unnoticed until it is tested. The nobles shifted in their seats, surprised that she did not immediately falter. They had expected her to fall to her knees, trembling, under the pressure of the moment. But she simply stood still, breathing slowly, her gaze calm and steady. It was not arrogance, nor defiance in the way they understood it. It was something else. Something quieter, deeper. The guards behind her glanced at each other. Even they had expected to drag her forward, to shove her into a kneeling position before the throne. But she did not move, and something in her stillness made them hesitate. The air in the chamber shifted ever so slightly, no longer just heavy with judgment, but laced with curiosity. She felt that shift. She knew all eyes were upon her, waiting to see if she would crumble. She thought of the long path that had brought her here, the whispers about humans being weak, the endless reminders that her kind were outsiders in this world of towering rulers and sharpened power. And yet, here she was, standing in their hall, small but unbroken. A voice rang out from the throne, deep and commanding. Though she could not understand every word of their alien tongue, she knew what it meant. It was a challenge, a demand that she bow, that she prove her place was beneath them. The room hushed, waiting for her to obey. Her chest rose with a steady breath. Slowly, she lowered her eyes, not to the floor, but to the creatures at the edge of the chamber. In the shadows, predator cubs sat in chains, their eyes glowing faintly as they watched her. They were young but dangerous, their claws sharp even at this age, their teeth made for tearing flesh. Everyone expected them to be used soon, perhaps as a cruel test of her will. But for now, they only stared. Their growls rumbled low, curious, and waiting. She met their gaze for a brief moment, and in that small exchange, something flickered. She did not see them as monsters, nor did she shrink from their sharp teeth. Instead, she looked at them the way one might look at a storm from a window, Dangerous, yes, but also alive, powerful, and not to be dismissed. The court noticed her eyes turning toward the cubs. They chuckled, thinking she was foolish to look anywhere but the throne. But what they did not see was the way her shoulders loosened, the way her breath steadied as though she had found an anchor in the chaos. She was not here to bow or to play the part they had chosen for her. She was here to endure. The ruler leaned forward, narrowing their gaze. Her stillness, her refusal to break, unsettled them more than any outburst of defiance might have. Outbursts could be crushed. Arrogance could be punished, but quiet strength was harder to tear apart. Quiet strength had a way of lingering. The whispers in the court grew louder. Some mocked her still, saying she was only delaying the inevitable. Others frowned, sensing that this small human girl was already doing something unexpected. Her presence, her calmness, was shifting the energy of the room in ways no one could quite name. Still she stood. No weapon in her hand, no armor on her body, no allies at her side. Only a steady breath, a calm gaze, and the kind of spirit that does not shout, but endures. The throne room, which had been filled with laughter and cruel smiles just moments ago, fell into a deeper silence. The girl had said nothing, done nothing. And yet, she had already changed the air around her. And so, the first part of her story began. Not with battle, not with power, but with a quiet arrival that unsettled an entire court. She was still, small, still human, still unarmed. But in her calm refusal to break, she carried a strength that none of them had expected to see. The silence of the throne room was broken by the slow scrape of metal against stone. A guard stepped forward, his armor flashing in the glow of the crystal lights, and pulled hard on a chain. The sound echoed through the chamber, sharp and heavy, followed by a low growl that seemed to ripple in the air. From the darkened side of the room, the predator cubs emerged. The crowd stirred, voices rising with cruel anticipation. This was what they had been waiting for, the moment when the little human would finally break. The cubs were young, but already large enough to kill. Their bodies were lean with muscle, their claws glinting like knives as they padded across the floor. The chain was loosed, and with one last clink of iron, the cubs were free. They spread out slowly, their glowing eyes locked on the girl standing in the center of the room. Their growls rumbled low, warning her that she was prey, that she should run while she had the chance. The air grew thick with the sound of claws scratching against the polished floor. The aliens on the balconies leaned forward, some with laughter spilling from their mouths, others whispering with hungry smiles. They expected a chase, a scream, or perhaps a quick fall to the sand-strewn stone. This was not about justice, nor even about punishment. It was a performance, one designed to humiliate the human, to prove her weakness before the throne. But the girl did not move. She stood where she was, her back straight, her hands loose at her sides. Her chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, her breathing calm and even. The cubs prowled closer, their growls louder now, sharp teeth flashing with each snarl. Still she did not flinch. Her eyes, wide but unwavering, stayed fixed on them. She did not shout, she did not run, she did not try to fight. She simply looked at them, not with challenge, but with a strange, quiet steadiness. The nobles muttered among themselves. Some sneered, saying it was foolishness. Others fell silent, unsettled by her calmness. The ruler on the throne narrowed their gaze, expecting the human to collapse at any moment. But the moment stretched longer, and still she did not break. One of the cubs lunged forward suddenly, its claws striking sparks as they scraped across the floor. The crowd gasped in delight, but the girl remained still. The cub stopped just short of her, its hot breath washing across her skin. She did not scream, she did not move. Slowly, she blinked, and the cub tilted its head, confused. Another cub circled behind her, its growl vibrating deep in its chest. Its claws clicked against the stone as it prowled closer, testing her. She turned her head slightly, meeting its glowing eyes. But again, she did not move away. The arena-like chamber grew strangely quiet. The crowd, once loud and expectant, was caught off guard. This was not the performance they had imagined. There was no terror, no begging for mercy, no frantic attempt to escape. Instead, there was only a girl standing in the middle of predators, her posture steady, her gaze calm. Her calmness did something the aliens did not understand. It unsettled the cubs. Predators thrived on fear, on the rush of prey running from them. But she gave them nothing. No trembling, no scent of panic, no sudden movements to chase. Only silence, only stillness, only a presence that did not belong to prey. The cubs began to circle slower, their growls fading into low rumbles of confusion. One lifted its head, sniffing at her as if trying to understand. Another swished its tail, muscles tense but uncertain. They had been released to attack, to terrify. But the girl's unshaken calm stole the purpose from their claws. The ruler shifted on the throne, tapping one clawed hand against the armrest. This was not how the test was supposed to go. The human was meant to crumble, to prove that her kind were weak. Yet here she was, still standing, her eyes unbroken. The crowd murmured, voices rising and falling like waves. Some mocked her, saying, it was only a matter of time before the cubs struck. Others whispered in confusion, asking why the cubs hesitated, why the human seemed untouched by fear. The air buzzed with uncertainty. The girl could feel the weight of every gaze, but she kept her focus on the cubs. Her heartbeat thudded in her chest, but she kept her breaths even. She knew if she showed fear now, the cubs would sense it, and the moment would be over. So she gave them only calm. One cub edged closer, its nose almost brushing against her leg. She stayed still, her eyes soft but steady. For a moment, the cub's growl faltered. It blinked, then stepped back, not in retreat, but in confusion. The others slowed with it. Their movements grew less sharp, their growls less certain. The crowd grew restless, voices rising in frustration. This was supposed to be quick, brutal, and certain. Instead, it was becoming something none of them understood. The girl stood in the center of it all, her small figure dwarfed by the massive chamber and the predators around her. She did not fight. She did not flee. She simply endured. And in her endurance, she shifted the air of the room. The cubs no longer looked like executioners. They looked like creatures caught between instinct and something new, drawn to the stillness of the human girl who refused to break. And in that moment, the test of presence began to unravel. What was meant as humiliation was becoming something else, something the court had not expected and something they were not prepared to control. The ruler leaned forward, eyes narrowing as the murmurs of the court grew louder. The girl had done nothing but stand still, but already she had broken the first layer of their trap. She was no longer simply a human on trial. She had become the center of attention for reasons they could not explain, and though she remained silent, her presence spoke louder than any words. The cubs moved in a slow, circling rhythm, their paws pressing against the polished floor of the throne room. Their claws scraped lightly, a sound like knives dragging across stone, sharp enough to make the air tense. Their growls echoed, deep and guttural, bouncing from the walls and back into the ears of every alien watching from the balconies above. The crowd leaned forward, eager to see the human girl finally collapse under the pressure. The nobles whispered to one another, their words carrying tones of mockery and certainty. To them, it was only a matter of time before nature took its course. No prey could withstand predators for long, but this girl was not prey. She stood in the center of the room, still and steady, her chest rising and falling in measured breaths. Her hands were loose at her sides, her shoulders straight. Her eyes followed the cubs, but not in panic. There was something calm, something steady in her gaze. She didn't run, didn't flinch, didn't try to push them away. The cubs prowled. Closer, their muscles rippling beneath their fur, every movement sharp and tense. One of them gave a short, sharp snarl, snapping its teeth together, the sound like a crack of bone. The girl didn't move. She blinked once, slowly, and the cub paused. The others continued circling, but they too began to sense something unusual. Predators could smell fear. It was sharp. It clung to the air like smoke. It made their blood quicken and their instincts rise. But here, with this small human standing alone, there was no such smell. The air around her was still, calm, almost. Quiet. The cubs growled again, their tails lashing back and forth. They tested her with quick movements, darting closer, pulling back, jaws snapping in the air just inches from her skin. But each time, she stayed rooted in her place. She neither challenged nor retreated. She gave them no reason to strike. The crowd murmured louder now, confusion mixing with their anticipation. This was not how the spectacle was supposed to go. The human girl should have screamed by now, should have fallen to her knees begging for mercy, or at the very least, broken into a desperate run. But she hadn't. Instead, something else was happening. The largest of the cubs slowed its pacing. Its golden eyes locked on hers, studying her with a strange, lingering focus. Its growl softened into something lower, more questioning than threatening. Slowly, it stepped closer, its paws silent now, its movements less like a hunter and more like a curious creature trying to understand. The girl's breath remained steady. She didn't move to touch it, didn't dare to break the fragile silence. But she lowered her head slightly, her gaze softening as though she was acknowledging the cub, not as a predator, but as a living being with its own mind. The cub tilted its head. Its ears twitched. Then, with a sound that startled even its handlers, it lowered its head. Its chin almost brushed the floor, a gesture of respect, of recognition. The throne room gasped as one. The other cubs faltered in their circling. They looked at the first, confused, as though unsure of what had just happened. Predators did not bow to prey. It was against everything they were. Yet the largest cub had done exactly that. And then, slowly, the others followed. One by one, the cubs lowered their heads. Their growls faded into soft rumbles that were not threats, but something gentler. They stepped closer to the girl, their massive bodies closing in, not as hunters preparing to strike, but as guardians choosing their place. They positioned themselves around her, their tails brushing the floor, their heads dipping low, forming a loose ring that faced outward instead of inward. The human girl stood at the center of them all, untouched. The silence in the room was heavy, now. The crowd that had been so loud a moment ago found themselves speechless. Murmurs rose again, but they were no longer filled with mocking laughter. They were filled with confusion, disbelief, and even unease. The ruler on the throne leaned forward, their expression darkening. This was not what they had commanded. The cubs had been trained, raised with instincts sharpened for combat and dominance. They were meant to strike without hesitation, to prove strength and fear. Yet here they were, standing beside the very human they were meant to destroy. The girl lifted her head slightly. She didn't smile, but there was something in her expression, a quiet understanding, a recognition that something irreversible had just happened. She hadn't spoken a single word, hadn't made a single command, but the cubs had chosen, and their choice was clear. They no longer saw her as prey. They saw her as one of their own. The nobles shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting between the throne and the ring of predators. Some whispered that it was a trick, others muttered that it was impossible, unnatural. But no one could deny what they were seeing. The cubs, Creatures bred for violence had rejected the command to kill. Instead, they had made their own decision. The eye. Girl reached out then, slowly, carefully, her hand moving toward the nearest cub. It watched her, unblinking, as her fingers brushed lightly across its fur. A low rumble came from its chest. Not a growl, but a sound of acceptance. The others shifted closer, their bodies pressing against her as if to shield her from the eyes watching above. The throne room, once filled with mocking certainty, now felt unsettled, fragile. What was meant to be a show of weakness had become something else entirely, a show of choice, of bond, of a strange unity no one had expected. The girl stood at the center of it all, surrounded by predators who had chosen her side. She had done nothing but remain calm, yet in that calm, she had turned the trial upside down. And for the first time, the aliens in the court looked at her not as a fragile outsider, but as something far more dangerous. A leader who could command, without force, a figure who had turned fear into trust. What was meant to break her had instead revealed something unshakable. The predators had made their choice, and with that choice, the court itself had begun to tremble. The throne room, once filled with certainty and smug whispers, had changed into something strange and uneasy. What had been set up as a simple show of humiliation now felt like the unraveling of order itself. The alien lords shifted in their seats, their eyes narrowing, their jaws tightening. They had expected the human girl to crumble under fear, to be reduced to nothing in the face of predator cubs. Instead, the cubs stood at her side, their bodies brushing against her as though she was part of their own. The predators that were supposed to kill her now looked to her for quiet guidance. The crowd murmured, the sound rising like a restless tide. Some laughed nervously, as though unwilling to admit what they were seeing. Others leaned forward, their gazes sharp, sensing something dangerous in this strange turn. A few looked away entirely, shaken by the sight of predators breaking their training and instincts for the sake of a single human. The girl did not raise her arms or shout. She did not strike any pose of defiance or call attention to herself. She simply stood there, steady as stone, her breathing calm, her hands relaxed at her sides. Then, with slow care, she lifted her hand. The nearest cub watched her closely, its golden eyes fixed on her fingers as they moved through the air. The entire court seemed to hold its breath, waiting for teeth to snap down on her hand, waiting for blood. But there was no attack. The cub lowered its head slightly, allowing her touch. Her fingers brushed against its thick fur, sliding over, the warm curve of its neck. The sound that followed was not a growl. It was a low, steady rumble, the kind that came when predators felt safe and content. The cub leaned into her touch, its body pressing against her leg in a gesture that could only be described as loyalty. A ripple went through the other cubs. One by one, they shifted closer, their bodies forming an unbreakable circle around her. Some pressed their heads against her hand. Others rested their tails across her feet as though marking her as their own. In that moment, the girl was no longer just a prisoner standing before a throne. She was something more, something the cubs had chosen. The aliens in the court erupted in whispers now, their voices tense. This cannot be. They are trained to obey. They do not disobey the throne. It is unnatural. The ruler on the throne leaned forward, their expression dark, their hand tightening against the armrest. What was meant as entertainment, a demonstration of human weakness, had turned into a spectacle that revealed a deeper truth. Strength did not always come from force. The girl had done nothing but remain calm. She had given no command, yet the cubs followed her. She had shown no weapon, yet the cubs protected her. In her silence, she revealed a kind of power the throne could not control, the power of presence, of calm, of unshaken spirit. The court grew restless. The nobles whispered about danger, about rebellion, about the meaning of what they had just witnessed. Could a single human truly bend predators without a word? Or had the predators themselves chosen her, rejecting the commands of their masters? Either way, the scene unsettled the balance of power. The girl lowered her hand again, resting it lightly on the head of the nearest cub. She did not smile. There was no triumph in her face, only quiet understanding. She seemed to know that this moment was larger than herself. The cubs pressed closer and the court grew louder. Some aliens shouted for the guards to step in, to restore. Order before the display of weakness became a seed of rebellion. Others urged patience, warning that forcing the cubs might only make them lash out, not at the girl, but at those who tried to separate them. The ruler raised a hand for silence, and the crowd obeyed. The air grew heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken tension. All eyes remained on the girl, the human who had turned the throne's own weapons against them. Not through battle, but through stillness. For a long moment, no one moved. The girl's calm presence had become the center of the room, the axis around which everything turned. The cubs had chosen her, and in doing so, they had shifted the court itself. What had been planned as her shame had become her strength. What was meant to show her weakness had revealed the throne's fragility instead. Because now, every noble in that vast hall had seen it. Power did not always roar. Sometimes it simply stood still, unafraid, and let others decide to follow, and the predators had made their decision. They had chosen her. The court would never forget it.